Okay. Good morning, dear friends, and welcome once again to the main object Big Book Study. I am an alcoholic. My name is David, and I've asked my friend Linda C. to read the preamble. I'm just going to, whoa, there we go. Okay, there's that. And Linda, if you could read that, please.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Linda, and I'm an alcoholic. The AA Preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Linda, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And now, if everybody would help me invite God into our meeting and our gathering today with the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we are as you probably know, but in case you don't, we are a line by line big book study. And today we are on page 47, about 2/3 the way down the page. And our purpose, as always, is to really unlock the book for every one of us here so that we can use it as a powerful tool. I would say the primary tool in our sobriety. And as you know, I mean, I attend a lot of meetings. Meetings are incredibly important to me. And as important as meetings are, they are no longer the hub of my sobriety. My hub or the foundation point of my sobriety is this book and the way of living in this book. And meetings, of course, are the means through which I learn about and share what I've come to understand in the book. So hopefully that same shift will happen for you as you get to really dive in here. And one of the things that we do is we divide the text into 5 categories, which I've shared before, but I'll share them again. And questions, directions and explanations, promises, warnings, and history. And those are the colors, are the highlighter colors that I use. And thank you, Rich, for that, putting that in the chat. That's also in the chat. And what that does is it really, again, helps unlock the book and turn it into a tool for sharing with others and in my own understanding, of course. And so, what we will do is I will speak on the text, and I think we'll be able to cover about 2 pages today. At least I hope so. And I'll speak on the text till about 7 o'clock, and then we will open it up. Just FYI, the meeting is being recorded, and it will be posted on our YouTube site. Only the audio is recorded, not the visual, and only my part, in case anyone is a little squeamish about having their comments put out there for the world. So today, as I said, we are on page 47. I'm just going to briefly recap where we are, because up to this point in We Agnostics, we've clearly established, or Bill has clearly established to the newcomer, two critical facts about the AA plan of recovery. The first is that the attainment of sobriety, this whole process of staying sober, is based on surrendering to a design for living, and that design is rooted in a power, a spiritual power greater than ourselves. So that's the first key fact. And the second, I should say, actually, rather than two critical facts, there are three, excuse me. And the second is that the spiritual power can be based on our own conception of an ultimate authority. We don't have to adopt anyone else's conception or any conception based on an organized religion. And the third key principle that Bill points out by this point is that this conception of a higher power, it serves as an important cornerstone of a more detailed way of life or design for living that we will discover or becomes clearer to us as we work the steps. And that last point is also critical, because this notion, and we talked about this last week, the notion of a power greater than ourselves that we envision is something that works as a starting point. However, as we progress in this way of life and we work the steps and we help others, what becomes evident is, I would say, a more universal sense of a higher power. And what I mean by universal is that it's shared by other people and that it has certain guidelines and parameters that it asks of us in order to progress spiritually. And I think actually that's what the steps are all about. So anyway, let's jump in. I'm at the bottom, near the bottom of page 47. Today what we are going to see in our reading is that it's almost like Bill slows down a little bit in this chapter. He was really throwing a lot of stuff at us very quickly, and now he sort of slows down because there's a key point that he wants to make today, and that key point has to do with the nature of finding a power greater than ourselves and how we do that. And he's making an argument here, and that argument that he is making is that that there is an underlying logic to having a higher power. And that logic is based on a design of the universe. The universe is based on some kind of design. And that design is external to us or our minds. And so what he's asking us to do is to let go of our preconceptions and our what he calls wordy arguments about what that higher power may be. So anyway, jumping in, what we're going to see is a lot of stuff highlighted in green for explanation. In fact, the paragraph, the last full paragraph on 47 that begins, "That was great news to us," that entire paragraph I have highlighted in green for an explanation. And so he's talking about the wonderful cornerstone of a higher power that is based on our own conception. And he said, "That was great news to us, for we had assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. When people presented us with spiritual approaches, how frequently did we all say, 'I wish I had what that man has. I'm sure it would work if I could only believe as he believes, but I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith which are so plain to him. So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level. In fact, I would say, not only can we commence at a simpler level, it's actually critical that we do commence at a simpler level because we're really building a new foundation for spirituality and our relationship to that higher power. I remember early on in the program, I was probably about a year sober, and I had a discussion with a home group member who also happened to be, I guess you would say, an AA priest. He was a priest in the program, and we were talking about surrender, and he told me something that's really informed my program to this day, because I was talking about, wow, I'm just realizing, you have to surrender everything to God. And he said to me, he said, yeah, and we even have to continually surrender our very conception or idea of God as well, and allow God to read. Now that's all he said. I'll of course add the commentary on that, and that is, God has, the longer I've been sober, what I've seen is God constantly rescripts himself in my life and redefines himself. And but what is critical is starting at that simpler level. The other thing that I think is really important here, especially when we're working with new people, is we're seeing in this paragraph that Bill is not so much concerned with the goal, that you get there, that you have this fully formed conception. What he's really focusing on, and we'll see this a lot today, is the focus is on the process. So, and what I mean by that is, if we just take the initial steps as they are prescribed, and then we follow each step along the path, that process will get us to the goal. I hope that makes sense, because what he's sort of contrasting throughout is that many organized religions, or at least our assumptions about organized religions, are based on this notion that, as it just says there, I wish I had what that man has. Meaning that people adopt a full package from the word go without question. And again, Bill is saying we're not going to do that here. We're going to start very simply. So the next line at the very bottom, last line on page 47, I have as a warning, and the next several lines after that. So I'll point this out. So this is warning. Besides a seeming inability to accept much on faith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice. Many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. All of that is warning. And as we'll see, what he's talking about is laying that aside. So one of the things I found in AA, and Bill doesn't explain it this way, but at least I'll try to explain it this way, is that it's not so much about acquiring a particular notion of God. It is about it's not about getting, it's about letting go of. So what we do is, because Bill has a rather, I think, radical conception of God, which I think has proven profound, at least in my life, maybe in yours. And that is, we don't have to take on anything new or outside of ourselves regarding a higher power, what we have to do is let go of the preconceptions or the ideas we already have. And what that does is it creates, they say nature abhors a vacuum. And if we open up the space, God, a God of our own understanding, will fill it. And I hope that makes sense, because that is a very different approach to spirituality than what we have found in many established religions. Let's just say that. The rest, not the rest of this paragraph, but the next several sentences I have in green, again for explanation. So we're talking about, so he's being very clear here, and I think he's saying we've been blocked by obstinacy, by prejudice, by our assumptions. I know that I had a lot of assumptions, even about, I had assumptions about religion, that when I began to explore formalized religion, I realized they were wrong. They were just based on my own conceptions. But anyway, probably one of the most important pieces of directions in our entire program, besides, of course, don't drink, is in this next sentence here. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. We have to let go of it. These preconceptions about spirituality. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Letting go, what Bill's point is that letting go of these preconceptions is not difficult. What might be difficult is cultivating the willingness to let go of them. But once we are willing and open, the actual letting go is the easy part. And this next sentence, I think, is very interesting. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. All of that is green. All of that is direction. Now, what he's also saying there is when he says faced with alcoholic destruction, I don't know about anybody else here, but when I eventually did everything the AA program was suggesting to me, it wasn't because I suddenly decided to be newcomer of the year, or I had finally paid for my subscription in AA Prime or anything like that. It was because God gave me the grace of white knuckle fear. And I don't know about anybody else, but white knuckle fear has motivated me to do many things in AA that I wouldn't have done up to that point. And I think, he doesn't use these words, and maybe I'm being a little dramatic about it. Okay, I'll grant you that. But I believe that's the same line of thinking that Bill is talking about when he says faced with alcoholic destruction. Now, excuse me, remember in our literature, I believe it's in the 12 and 12, where Bill talks about this notion of how we have to raise the bottom for many people who maybe weren't faced with the peril and destruction that many of us were. And so I think that is critical that we instill an understanding. And I think, and this is, I'm going to jump up on my soapbox, then jump quickly down. And that is one of the disservices we often do ourselves, that I have often done, is lowered the bar so much that I don't want to scare anybody away or turn anyone away, and I just want to encourage people. And I just want to make this almost like I don't know, like everybody, every kid gets a trophy. And the problem when I do that is I lose sharing the reality of this disease. And I deprive people of the opportunity of coming to a bottom that would motivate them to actually develop a real relationship with a higher power. Okay, off the soapbox. And then the last sentence in this paragraph I have as a warning. Sometimes this was a tedious process, and according to the 1939 dictionary, tedious means weariness through repetition. So I think what he's talking about there is he may even be talking about or referring to repeated slips, repeated failure in the program. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope that no one will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. Okay. And then the next paragraph, the first, it doesn't have a question mark, but it's essentially a question, what he's saying. He's proposing a question. The reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. And so what he's trying to do, pretty much in everything we're going to read for the rest of our time reading today, is really about building a case for the legitimacy or the reason why we should believe in a power greater than ourselves. And he's really dismantling our intellectual barriers to a higher power here. And he says, we think there are good reasons. And I have that in green for directions. What I'm going to say here, I think, is important because, especially when working with newcomers, and that is that sentence, we think there are good reasons. He's not just, I don't think Bill is just commenting on that, on like, hey, this is a valid idea. He's also speaking to us who are carrying the message. And I think what he's saying is, if you're going to carry this message, you have to buy into this wholeheartedly and understand why we think it's a good idea. Like, you need, if you're going to carry this message, you have to advocate for this. Let's have a look at some of these good reasons, at some of them. The rest of this page, just to cut to the chase, is all green, all direction. So now he is going to give us direction. And he's sort of like taking us through spiritual boot camp here in these next couple paragraphs. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, The 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes them without a murmur of doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without a reasonable assumption as a starting point. What he's talking about there is that we need a logical / reasonable assumption, a core kernel idea upon which our faith is based. And it has to be one that makes sense to us. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It is constantly being revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. And that can apply to each one of us as well. Meaning that to a newcomer, we may seem confident, we might seem knowledgeable, but that's an outward appearance, because the reality is that if we are living a happy, joyous, and free lifestyle, it's not about being confident, it's not about being knowledgeable. Those things are gifts from a higher power. It's actually about a different inner reality based on surrender. So to illustrate, the prosaic, and prosaic means ordinary, modern, or not modern, ordinary. The prosaic steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. In other words, one of the most solid objects we can think about, a steel girder, is actually not solid at all. So there's an underlying paradox, is what he's saying there. And so it's he's sort of laying out the idea of, hey, the universe is based on, I'm going to throw a graduate school word at you, gang, counterintuitive. Intuitive meaning what we would presume or what we would think is logical, and the reality is actually the opposite. The rest, so science tells us so, we have no reason to doubt it. Okay, that's direction. The rest of what we are going to read today, the rest of this paragraph and the short paragraph in the middle of the page, are all warning. Because now he's talking about the risks of holding on to our prejudices and our obstinacy. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world, life as we see it, there is an all-powerful, guiding, creative intelligence. Notice those are all capitalized. Anytime you see a noun capitalized in the big book, I mean, obviously, except when it's at the beginning of a sentence, but if it's in the middle of the sentence and it's a noun and it's capitalized, it probably is referring to God or a higher power in some way. There is an all powerful, guiding, creative intelligence. Right there, our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously, it's a fancy way of saying we put a lot of effort into setting out, we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Okay. The argument he's making there is that even though we balk at the fact, there is an underlying, his point that he's trying to make is that there is an underlying design for the universe and life as we understand it, even though we may not see it. There's a structure, there's a design, and he's going to drive that point home in the next few sentences. Were our contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. The first part of that paragraph, there's an underlying design. The second, what we just read, is that design has a purpose. And why I think that's important is when we are working with a new person and we're starting to talk about God, if they are, if they're balking at the idea of a higher power or a higher design, they are probably also balking at the notion that there is a higher purpose for their lives and for themselves. And I think, and I can tell you that one of the greatest gifts that my higher power has given me is a sense of purpose and meaning and design in my life. I'm just going to read this next paragraph and then we'll open it up. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word. The alpha is the first letter in the Greek alphabet, and omega, last letter in the Greek alphabet. So the A to Z is what he's saying. The alpha and omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? You could say that's a question. I kept it as a warning. Vain being a derivative of vanity. And vanity isn't just always staring at ourselves in a mirror. It's really when you look at, and our 12 and 12 talks about pride being one of the 7 deadly sins, and this vanity and pride are very closely related. And and I think what he's talking about there is the vanity is not just adoration of ourselves, but placing ourselves above God. And what he is saying is that rather than surrendering to a higher power, we have made our minds and our intelligence the higher power through which we guide our lives. And that's probably one of the most critical warnings in our book. So with that, we went deep today. We got philosophical today. So with that, I'm gonna open it up